Good afternoon. My name is Alan, and I'm here to present sustainable intensification for smallholders. I am pre-recording this message, so please hold off any questions until the very end, and I will try my best to answer your questions. Um, Sustainable intensification practices basically, in theory, increase smallholder yields, the small farmers, and eventually reduce demand to clear additional land. The three topics that I will discuss is intercropping, IPM, which I will discuss further, and the equal resources for women. To start, I will try to address the why. Why do we need to have sustainable practices for the smallholders? Well, one of it is because of the food gap. There is a large food inequity between social and economic classes, and much like the wealth gap, nutritional disparity between developing nations and fully developed nations are increasing. According to a Harvard School of Public Health study, the gap between groups have doubled between 2000 and 2010. This is even more alarming because farming and food production are undertaken by those with decreased socioeconomic status. Basically, the farmers themselves are affected by this. And on principle alone, most farmers can afford to benefit from their own labor. Um, Also, increase in food demand. By 2030, global food demand is expected to rise by 35%. And the Farming First initiative estimates that 77% of demand must come from efficiencies in current farming methods just because we don't have enough manpower and labor to sustain our increased demand. And lastly, equity. According to Women at Work, published by the International Labour Organization in a 2016 study, agriculture is the top resource of employment for women, though it is projected to be overtaken by the service industry. However, the agricultural sector is rife with wage and benefit issues as well as sexual discrimination and harassment. And this is according to solidarity.org. And how? So, uh, there are numerous topics that aim to answer the previous problems, especially the food supply. However, I will try to focus on the three main issues, which is intercropping, integrated pest management, and equity and resource allocation. First, we will tackle intercropping. Intercropping is the practice of planting two or more crops in a field at the same time. The practice takes advantage of certain plant use and the regeneration of certain nutrients. For example, in some coconut farms, coffee are planted in between coconuts. Coffee plants need shade to efficiently grow, and coconuts also provide mulch from fallen palm leaves that help retain soil moisture. In a study, Syndromes of Reduction in Intercropping Impact Yield Yields, published in January of 2020, an analysis concluded that there is a 16 to 29% efficiency in gain in land use and a reduction of 36% less fertilizers when intercropping methods are used. Uh, like what I said, example are shade crops and tall trees. Next up is eco-based pest management solutions. Uh, when we tackled earlier efficiency and gains in land use, this is basically sustainability and durability of plants and crops. California is one of the states that has a very good IPM initiative, or integrated pest management. Uh, the UC Agriculture and Natural Resources uh, focuses on long-term prevention and management of pets and their damage. So note I said management and not eradication. They focus more on biological control, habitat manipulation, cultural practice modifications, and use of hardier plants and use of chemical pesticides if possible, is avoided and used only as a last resort. Uh, One example that I can think of, it's an older practice, is the use of predator fowl um, in rice fields plagued by snails. I am unsure of its viability now. However, it is kind of a simple example. So when there is an overabundance of snails, they introduce, I believe, they're ducks or some sort of geese that eat the snails, and twofold, it saves uh, resource for feeding the geese, and it curtails pest growth in the form of snails. Finally, we will discuss the equity solutions to sustainable practices for smallholder. Equity is important in food production. Rural women in developing countries are now working in the once dominated, men dominated industry. This industry is poorly regulated in developing countries. It has very low wage and rife with unsafe practices. For farming practices lead to heavy seasonality employment and promotes unsafe working conditions. What I mean by these is just because uh, the yields are low, and that means that they do not have any stable income or employment compared to having a more regulated farming practice where it kind of cycles in. So at any given point, the workers have a time to harvest and plant, and not all happening at the same time. Also, poor regulation of pesticides expose women to harming agents that have long-term effect that go beyond their workplace exposure. And especially in developing countries, women are also caretakers of the home. So not only they work, but they have to take care of the children, and they also or child, and they also have to take care of domestic work. So, in conclusion, global food demand will continually increase, and without any change in practices and equal opportunity protections, uh, we are risking another preventable global calamity, especially with climate change. Uh, Crops and plants are kind of having this weird seasonality, and not only we have to adapt because of that, and we're also risking uh, losing these resources uh, if we don't do anything, if we don't change anything. And I believe that awareness and our own personal practices will help uh, the agricultural industry, even if we are not directly into it. And the best way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing. Thank you, and here's my resources. Let me know if you would like to read more. Uh, Thank you for listening.